they only have like 8 episodes for the season. But each episode is like an hour and 15 minutes. It's ridiculous. It's insane. It's ridiculous.
That's 8 movies.
It's egregious. Yeah.
I only have time to watch one movie.
Okay, and you chose Polar Express.
Yeah.
No offense. No, that sounded really mean. Look, Polar Express is fine.
Look, first of all, it wasn't my decision, okay? It was a familial choice. And it's a really good movie. It's a special movie.
I know. Okay, but have you watched it already before?
Yeah, several times. It's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful movie.
Is it really?
And now I have more context and like animation and stuff. Like it's a lot interesting to look at it
The
in that,
motion capture.
in that perspective and stuff. Yeah, no, and a lot of it is just really nice. Like it's just super cool. Yeah, Tesla 4. That's not 4. That's pretty cool.
Wait, say that again?
Polar Express, my Tesla 4. That's when I was 4.
Where did this for? I can't say anything. That's where 2001.
You were born in 2004.
Aren't you born 2005?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is it? We're good. Very good. No, fair enough. Fair enough.
Everyone whose birth year starts in 19, raise your hand. What? What? Oh, you're 18? You didn't raise your
It's
hand.
brutal.
That was crazy.
I've been teaching this class since just after the Civil War.
Man, you get to see everything develop. It's awesome.
It's been a long ride.
Blender has come a long way since the Civil War.
Yeah. Yeah, that Reconstruction era, Blender was pretty rough, yeah, for a lot of different reasons.
Is that your pun calendar? It's not anything.
Hey, Angie, give me a thumbs up. Make sure you can hear me. If only I had some way to mute the rest of the class.
We should all have our own personal mics.
I mean,
Come up on
yeah, I mean, I've thought about it and then just, you know.
Wait, did you genuinely think about that?
Well, I mean, because of this issue, like that way, when you guys ask questions, I mean, sometimes I repeat it, most of the time I don't, and so the people at home have a hard time hearing the same thing. So
The captions somehow like actually pick them up. I don't know if you've seen that, but like
it is
they'll
do it
like
pretty good.
Nothing. You'll hear nothing, and then you see the captions. It'll be like the question. I'm like, how does he even hear that? Like, I don't know.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the captioning technology is really, pretty awesome. You know, it's really enabled the whole thing. The whole lecture search thing now, like like none of the captioning is my doing. Like that's just freely available. YouTube does that, and then I just pull it down and do all the other stuff. Yeah, they're really great. They're not officially ADA compliant, but for the most part, it has been super functional. Cool. All right, well, let me finish the thing that got interrupted by our power outage, and hopefully we don't have another power outage. Then we'll look at yours from last week. Okay, so what were we doing? We were, for the highest quality compositing workflow here, we would be outputting in EXR, Y in EXR. 1, it allows us to, it's multi-channel and can accommodate a higher bit depth. PNGs can also work with higher bit depths, but that format is limited to RGBA. EXR channels when it's a multi-channel EXR, I don't think there's a limit. There's no functional limit that I've ever run into here, right? And so instead of having all of your passes as separate piles of files, just having one file, one image sequence that contains all of whatever info you want, right? So that's the other upside here, is that, I mean, obviously you want the beauty pass regardless, but then, you know, are you going to use the depth pass for depth of field compositing? Are you going to use cryptomats for whatever? You get to pick there, right? And so in Blender, the issue is that we need to make sure we set up the comp for this, and we set up the view layers, and we set up the file output. All of those things need to be in place. And then in AE, we need to make sure that we change the bit depth, because the default 8-bit depth that After Effects is set to is essentially counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve here in terms of greater dynamic range being brightness. And then the other thing that got, I think, when we directly got interrupted is the After Effects effect that makes this happen is extractor. I think it's in all caps actually in the program. And you know, like ext tractor. See what they're doing there, right? You extract from the EXR. Yeah, kind of just driving a tractor worth of channel layers over to After Effects. And so this allows you to choose which part of which channel you put on which layer, and then you got to do all the other stuff, right? So, so there is, you know, some config there, but for the most part, it's not. I think it's not prohibitive in that case. Okay, so back here, over here. All right, and so what we did here was we did layers, right? And so we'll do a first example here with the beauty pass, and then the mist pass to do an example with depth of field stuff, and then we'll look at some of the cryptomat options. But all of these other things you have access to, should we want to work on that. Actually, let's send the ambient occlusion, because that's another super useful one. And then, yeah, we did all the stuff with the mist pass in terms of making sure that's in the viewport display so that this line shows up, and then configuring that line in the other tab. Yeah, in the world settings, just to control where the mist pass begins and ends. And of course, I'll probably fairly arbitrarily oscillate between mist pass and depth pass. Blender calls it a mist pass, but in a lot of other places, you'll just hear it referred to as the depth pass. Great. Okay, so then that's what we did over here. Over here, we got this stuff hooked up just so we can see what we're doing. If I just press a button here, we've got that. Then the new node that we created was file output. In the render settings, we also set up OpenEXR multi-layer float half, right? So float half, float full is related to the bit depth issue, where, you know, for the most part, when we're talking about storing numbers in the computer, we can think of them as having this infinite range like numbers and math do. In the actual execution of this, that's not possible. We don't have infinite storage in the computer. And so the maximum range you can represent is limited by how many bits you actually allocate to store the number. This is not something that you run up against unless you're writing software on a regular basis in the programs. And so obviously the more bits you have, the more places you can store, and in this case, the more resolution you could have. But yeah, half is going to be enough bits for us in this instance, right? Because this is higher quality, but it is going to be, compared to our usual outputting of JPEGs or outputting of MP4s or outputting of PNGs even, this is going to be much more data. And so, especially when we get to After Effects, those of you who don't have a separate drive for data, that's most of you have an external hard drive. If your external hard drive is a solid state SSD, you could use it for this, where you put the EXR sequence not on the system drive. This, there's one drive here, the system. This is where you're running all of your Windows software. It goes to the CPU. And then you get more bandwidth because there's connections between the actual drive and the CPU. And then over here you would have something separate. It could be an external hard drive if it's a solid state drive. If it's a spinning drive, it's most likely not fast enough that this is going to help. But now, in this case, where they're both fast solid state drives, we get 2 lanes to dump data in there, and that tends to be faster. There's all sorts of ways this could get screwed up, but for the most part, this is the better way to go about it. Okay, so with that in mind, this doesn't play a role with the actual rendering of the frames. This would be more when you're working with the actual composite. The rendering of the frames is all happening, either in the RAM or like on the CPU, GPU, and then the GPU memory. And so the slowest part is that is never the writing the file back to the disk. Like having a better pipe there isn't the problem, isn't the bottleneck. Good. So here in this node, we can't add. This allows us to configure the file output, and you can make as many slots here as you want. Let's have 2 for right now. And in order to add more slots, you need to say add input, and you want these settings to be the same as the other ones. Good. The codec and compression here is, I believe it's just doing lossless compression. So I've mentioned this before, but just these are 2, when you're just reading everything or watching stuff, you have lossy compression, and the final image or movie is not the same as the one that you started off with, right? But in most instances, it is much, much smaller. And then there's lossless. And in this, I'll write the whole word so it doesn't get confused with comp. The final image is identical. And for the most part, this tends to be a larger file than lossy compression. But it's still smaller than the completely uncompressed file. And so, yeah, why ever use this? It's because the amount you can smush the data, really, really brilliant people have designed the codecs that do this kind of stuff. Even though it's not the same, most of the time when you're discussing this, it's not the same in that if you looked at all of the pixel values, pixel for pixel, they would not be exactly the same. There would be some cheating happening there of one kind or another. But by leveraging a bunch of computer compression techniques and then understanding how human optics works, they try to steer these things in the direction so that the data that you're losing to make the image smaller is imperceptible if you're just looking at it, right? But we're not interested in just looking at it. We actually want to do some transformations to it, right? Hence the scopes and everything. And we could see that the actual, right, in a lot of those instances, even if I A-B'd a well-compressed lossy versus lossless, like in lots of instances, I wouldn't be able to like pick it out, right? It's just that when you actually start to do something to it, then it really amplifies all those artifacts from the lossy compression. So here, I believe when it's using the zip in this format, it's lossless. What are the other options here? Yeah, these are other like file compression techniques. Great. I think that's all good. That's good. Let me make sure I have a folder for this. Where did I put this? 240 multipass EXR. Accept. And let's just look in the folder real quick. Yeah, there we are, accumulating. The other downside is that we don't see it here, but that's understandable, right? How would Windows know what to do, right? There's some sort of arbitrary and random number of channels in this image, and so trying to figure out how to display it would not be trivial. Okay, there we go. Now we've got something back over here. Let's bring this in. This is the other advantage to rendering anything in an image sequence, is that we can start over here while that's still chugging away. Now, this is fine because, this is progressing fairly quickly, and so it's not that big of a deal. But if, for whatever reason, you, despite my continued warnings, decided to use cycles for different parts of it or something like that, and it's taking a while to render, having After Effects open while you're rendering in Blender is slowing Blender down 100%, right? I mean, that's not how much it's slowing it down. It's for sure slowing it down. How much it's slowing it down could be well in excess of 100%, right? So if you're up against it in terms of render time, quit everything else except for Blender, even Chrome, right? Chrome, especially if you use it the way I do and you have 100 tabs open at the same time, it's going to eat up a ton of RAM. And so that's also slowing down your render time. There's been instances where I forgot about this and then quit After Effects, and it literally rendered like in a quarter of the time it was rendering previously. It makes a big, big difference. After Effects, just like, well, I mean, you want your program to take advantage of all of the resources the computer has to offer. And if everybody does that with their program and you run all the programs at the same time, there's clearly an issue there. So let's bring this in. Cool. And I'll just say new comp from selection for now. Although, yeah, really, again, just as a reminder, because this is forgotten often, whatever you ended up using as your frame rate in Blender, right, and if it's timed out in a way that is critical, it's important that your frame rate here match your frame rate here under interpret footage, main, frame rate, right? So if you want the timing to be the same, those need to be the same. Then there's the separate issue of what settings the comp in After Effects is at, right? There could be different numbers for all of these slots, right? I mean, you definitely want the Blender frame rate of the image sequence to match the import frame rate over here, but you can put footage of a different frame rate on the timeline, and After Effects will handle that more or less elegantly depending on, you know, what the numbers are and a bunch of other issues. But for our purposes, just keeping the same frame rate throughout is by far the easier way to go. This is multi-pass depth. And so here, we've got this in place. Also in After Effects, remember, in order to do this under, not project settings, edit preferences, we need, no, it is project settings. Edit project settings, color, 16 bits per channel. Okay, now we're there. Let's put the effect on here. Okay, only the first, yeah, EXR. See what they did there? Right, because you're using it for EXRs, extractor.
That's strange.
Yeah, it's
Stranger Things. Well, you should. They got cute with it. That's nice. They have like a personality.
Yeah.
you know, it was probably a separate thing that was then bought by Adobe, but I'm not sure. So now the extract error, yeah, you'll see just it being black. And now in here we should see, yeah, the list of stuff that we had over here. And if we look at this, let's see. Or the mist pass. So the mist pass here ends up being pretty contrasty in terms of, in order to get some more gradations in the depth of field, I might want to go back and adjust that so that, you know, we're seeing more gradient there, not a lot of 100% black, 100% white. But if we were to use these separately now, right, so a lot of this is that we want to, so that's the ambient occlusion. How might I put this together, right? So here, since they're all going to be the same, labeling the layer is important here, right? So and I can just create some duplicates here. This is going to be AO. This is going to be there we go. And make sure that this is the ambient occlusion. Make sure that this is the mist. There we go. And usually the beauty on top there. So now if we wanted to make adjustments to this, right, again, we get all this room to use our scopes there. that we would not have otherwise. And we're not going to get any weird banding. A lot of this comes down to the quality of the gradients, right? The gradients are important for the change in color and value across the surface of the objects. And the gradients are smooth gradients, means that there's many slight variations in the actual value. And one of the things that happens with compression is that gradients can get this banding that happens because it tries to not store all of that variation and instead cheat and just give you rings. You've all seen this if you've like tried to smush a JPEG with levels or something like that, and all of the in this case it would be, you know, quantizing or dithering becomes really obvious. But because we've got this better bit depth to work with here and this is set well, we're okay. If this is really chugging on your computer, this is super important in After Effects, right? This is our how many pixels are we looking at in the viewport, and if you step on this, things definitely run a little bit quicker, and then you can always, you know, come back later. This is really just the viewing level, and so that's a big one for saving processing power in After Effects. Also, once you're in After Effects, clearing your cache. So under Preferences. So After Effects is using your RAM, and then it's also writing stuff onto just the blank space on your hard drive. So if there's no blank space on your hard drive, then that will be an obstacle and slow things down. Also, you can choose where the disk cache is. And so if you have that extra drive, either a fast external or a separate internal, that's where you want to tell your After Effects cache to live, right? I have a separate like M2 storage on my home machine that, you know, it's where, you know, like I'm storing the media that I'm working on now, and then there's another folder just labeled AE cache where, you know, After Effects writes to that, and you can control how much of that it is. And then you can just, you know, purge this every once in a while. I think, isn't there a setting here to like do it when you open the program? Anyways, it eats up a ton of storage. And so this is not deleting any files that you can use. These are just, they are files. Like you can look at them. I mean, you can see that they're there on your computer in the file browser, but I don't think you can't open them or anything. It's just where After Effects is storing data. Okay, there. And so here, how do we use the mist pass? Now that we have it set to that, we could use it with for that really nice lens blur, right? And so the lens blur, again, is one of those After Effects effects that needs two inputs, right? And so this is where the nodal compositing, I think, is more operationally clear versus what's happening here with the layers, in terms of we put the effect on the beauty pass, but then it needs to reference the actual mist pass. And so over here, we look for the lens blur. And here, under blur map, we select the mist. Again, super important to label everything. And then our blur radius here. There we go. All right, why wasn't it working before? So this is another, when you reference another layer in After Effects like this, it needs to know like it's sampling those pixels And at what point in the compositing do you want me to sample the pixels? Do you want me to sample the pixels of the raw layer, or do you want me to sample the pixels of the layer after I compute the effects that are on that layer, right? And all of these layers have effects because the extractor is an effect, right? And so the reason, even though I selected mist here, I crank up the blur radius to 300 and nothing's happening, it's because it is not reading those because it's just looking at the like this just doesn't work in this case because the extractor is the thing that actually gets us the depth path information. So after effects and masks, and now we should see very clearly that this is working on what's happening there. And so the gain on what's going on here can do a lot to give you that sort of like blown out depth of field look that may require more compositing steps over in Blender. And then the hexagon shape here, this has to do with that bokeh shape, right? And so if this is even higher, if we want that to really pop, the gain would need to be higher if we bring this down. And then you could see how these different shapes for the simulation of the aperture on the camera would take effect. Do you have an option for your own? With this filter, I don't think you do. Cool. Okay, so extreme depth of field in a way where you can adjust it more easily afterwards, and it's not baked in, right? And then we also have much better bit depth. AO, right? So AO, if we just look at this by itself, right, is our darkening of what's behind based on what's above. And if we wanted to use this in our compositing, this could go up above our beauty, and then we could adjust the blend mode here, right? And so if we want to darken what's below with what's above, we need to put this in which blend mode? Multiply, or one of the multiply options there. So if you're not seeing the mode stuff down here, you need to right click and go to columns and make sure that modes is checked. Then I just unchecked it. There we go. Now it's back. And so this needs to go into one of these, right? So there's darken, there's multiply, there's color burn. You can see that these, slightly different degrees to which the ambient occlusion matters. I don't know why we have this big black background in our ambient occlusion pass, because that's just a thing there. Something weird with the way that got rendered. But the as we discussed before, you could do this or other creative things with this, right? If this was in add blend mode, and you were to maybe invert it, you can get that brightening of these corners, kind of gives you a glowy sort of look. And we could limit some of this if we had a track mat or right? So the equivalent here is the crypto mat in Blender is going to become a track mat in After Effects. So let's get one of those in here. And we'll try rendering this again and see if we get the same ambient occlusion weirdness. It's because of the alpha channel? Perhaps. We'll look. Good. Okay, so there we go. Let's enable a crypto mat. So I'll add one here. Ambient occlusion. I'll add one here for person. Oops. And we want the, object. Oh, I have to hit render again or else it won't know what's what. There we go. If I were to look at this, gives me that, right? So in this case, right, depending on the scene, if you had multiple things, the character has two different materials, and this particular character has like two different mesh objects. So there's that. Yeah, let's do this because it'll be a little bit more complicated, but should serve as an example. We'll say person mat 1, and then we'll add another one here. Person. Why does it keep doing that? Person mat 2. And Control C, Control V, or actually, well, yeah, here, we'll do it with 2 mats. All right, and so there, I'm just sort of looking at that so I can get an option. All of this stuff is there. And yeah, I'm going to put this in a separate folder so I don't get confused. And let's save incremental. And control F12. And let's just check in on the file size here. Yeah, I mean, certainly larger than rendering out our JPEGs, but not quite as bad as I would have thought. So that's good. If just for the sake of argument, I think our zip compression is contributing quite a bit here because a lot of the information is just black and white. Let's say none, just to see how that would look. Yeah. Right, so that's the difference here is the effectiveness of the, in this case, lossless compression. So back here, we bring this one in. And get the extractor on there. There we go. And there's one mat. Here's the other one. Let's actually look at it. There we go. Okay, so now, yeah, some more. As an example here, right? So what we ended up here with is both mats combined on mat 2 here. But let's say we needed to do something where we needed to combine mats over here, right? Where we had separate passes that we wanted to combine. And so our workflow here is that we want to pre-comp, not pre-camp, that's different, pre-comp all mats. And we want to brighten the ones with the other ones. And so we want to almost certainly put them all in add mode, which would allow you to create mats out of other combined mats, right? So, and then we would use the pre-comp as a track mat. Okay, so we want to let's label these so that we know what we're doing. I can't stress this enough, like labeling stuff in After Effects is critically important. Okay, and so we want to pre-comp both of these together, shift-click, right-click, pre-compose, and then in almost all instances that we're using on a regular basis, I have this option selected, not this one, so that it actually is moving the stuff to the pre-comp. And so we'll call this mat pre-comp, and then we'll say okay. And then, right now we start nested things in After Effects. And so here you get what Adobe thinks is some sort of really great combination of layer-based compositing with some sort of nodal representation, right? And so there's this tiny little button here, and this shows you a map of all of the comps and pre-comps in the, they're connected to the currently selected pre-comp, I believe. And this is not editable. You can't move stuff around here like we can in the Blender node views, but it does help in terms of being able to like see what's connected to what there. So now when we come in here, if we want to add these together, let's just put them in the add blend mode. There we go. And so now they're combined. Now back over here, we could use this as a track mat. And so on the beauty comp, we need to select the mat pre-comp as the track mat. So here, we have those combined. We said use this one. Okay. And so now we come down to, this is less confusing than it used to be. It's just I'm used to the old way, and so that was a little confusing. Right, you just can, usually this is above. It doesn't matter, because once you say you're going to start to use it as a mat, After Effects turns it off, so you're not seeing it, right? So it could be above or below. Next is the topic which you need to understand, alpha mats versus luma mats, okay? And so this just comes down to, you know, when we're using a mat or a mask here, the visual language is always show me the white, hide the black stuff, right? The difference here is where are we reading this black and white from? And so in an alpha mat, we are only looking in the alpha channel. But as you now know, not all images have alpha channels, right? Right, there's the RGB where there's the color, and then there can optionally be the fourth alpha channel where we store this separate transparency information. When we use a luma mat, we are looking at the brightness of the RGB channels. So in this case, you know, this button is a toggle. So, I mean, you could just jam it until you see what you want and then call it a day. Or, like, how would we actually make some sort of knowledge about what's happening here? In After Effects, we can choose what we're seeing here, right? And so in this, allows us to look at individual channels. The brightness of the red, the brightness of the green, the brightness of the blue, in this case all the same, and then also separately look at the alpha channel. The alpha channel here is the entire frame, because the mask data, when we saved the mask data, it stored it as just color data in the RGB. It, you know, it doesn't, this is where it can just, you know, program to program, even within the environment. You just need to be paying attention to what's happening here. A lot of times when you have scalar data, one of the popular default behaviors is that I just take the same, for whatever reason, instead of just storing one channel worth of black and white data, I take the black and white data and I copy it to the RGB channels and I store it 3 times. That's obviously not the most efficient way to do it, but it happens a lot in these systems. And so in that case, that's what happened here, where we routed the matte, which is gray, to the gray channel, but then in the EXR saving format, it did save it as, just the same black and white information, this black and white information in the red, the green, and the blue channels. And so that's why over here, in order to read that stuff, we want it to be a Luma matte, right? Because that's where the mask information is. And so once we go back to looking at everything here, this is put back to Luma matte, and then this is turned back on. Now it actually cuts out our character using all of the stuff, right? And so now we can process our character completely separately from the background. And so here on this one, it doesn't need to have the matte. Like, this essentially just becomes the background, right? And so even without any depth of field, like super cheap depth of field, like essentially binary depth of field, is like blur the background and keep the front thing in focus, right? And so, no special depth map, just Gaussian blur on the background here, right? And yeah, it works to some not blurring our front character simply because, it is doing it, but it's being covered up by, the cutout that's in front here. Or if we want to take the character and change color, we get the hue saturation on this one, and we could change the color of the character, and that's limited to just that background. Make sense there? Right? So, yeah, clicky, but I mean, not having to load a whole bunch of separate passes and just being able to access them as you would like, I think is pretty, this is the simplest option now, especially, right? I mean, regardless of how you've been doing it up until this point, right? Unless, you're really confident in the way everything's set up in Blender and it's been working for you, like rendering out your image sequences, and then, maybe you use some of the Blender effects and you bake them in, and then you also bring over some other passes here to assemble the entire sequence in After Effects. I think it's just the Blender editing in terms of just like changing where shots start and shots end, and all of that business is just easier over here, especially if you've, if you took 184 here at GCC and you did a bunch of After Effects, you've got some reasonable amount of familiarity here with After Effects. And so this helps quite a bit here in terms of working with all this stuff. And it's super flexible, right? Whatever you would want, whatever passes you need are the ones that you can bring over here, right? And yeah, I mean, like every program is trying to solve this, where it's like, man, what if we just stayed here, right? And so like Blackmagic Resolve has Fusion, which is kind of like a After Effects nodal situation built into Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve. They're probably the closest in terms of the whole, like you can do the editing and the comping all in the same place. Houdini has this all built in, not really the video editing, more of like the comp per shot. But it's pretty, still the rendering there is tough. Just, by default, very slow. But, yeah. Any questions there? Does this make sense? Yeah, I feel like everybody's getting a feel for this, what the quote unquote typical use of the different blend layers or different render layers are, and then also, what we were doing to, experiment with them, right? I think there's a lot of ground to be covered there in terms of doing interesting things. The one glaring, now that we don't have the red giant stuff, chromatic aberration in After Effects. Yeah, those are all the red giant effects, which we don't have anymore. First of all, I mean, there's two, I would say these are, even if you're not doing something, experimental or very visually dynamic with the compositing, for a lot of, 3D looking, things that are not going to be completely flat, parts of the pipeline, we usually have some kind of grain. Because again, this is where the CG is just too perfect. Like there's no, even with digital cameras, you're getting grain. There's still noisiness in the digital sensor that's collecting the photons that gives you, the equivalent of film grain here, which is, digitally here, when we're talking about it, just overlaid noise, right? That goes a long way to simulating film grain. Then we talked about the lens distortion. So the lensing stuff here, either distortion or chromatic aberration. The chromatic aberration is the one that's kind of a pain point here. We can look at how you could put that together with a couple things. There's no off-the-shelf chromatic aberration in, maybe there's a free one. I have to look. We had the red giant stuff for a long time, and there's a really nice one in there, which we were just using. And then, what was the other thing I was thinking about? Oh, just general color correction. I'm usually going to, curves or levels here at the end of the day. And if we want, this is typically stuff that's going to apply to, the entire comp, right? Like below this, we have our mattes and our mist layers and our depth of fields and all that sort of stuff. And this is all on a level above, affecting everything below. And so in After Effects, this is all most easily done on adjustment layer, which an adjustment layer doesn't have any media on it. It's just like a home for an effect that affects all the stuff below it in the stack, in the layer stack. So over here, if we made a new adjustment layer, we get this. And then over here, if I put levels on this, or let's just put curves on this. There we go. And so now this would affect everything below it, right? It's the foreground and the background in this instance. Then the grain, right? So add grain here is the, typical effect for doing this. We put this on the adjustment layer as well. But the add grain can be slow for sure. And that's why anytime you have a slow-ish effect here is After Effects puts it in this little box so that it's, not totally destroying your playback speed. Maybe they did something to speed this effect up, because even that would usually crunch it. So anytime you see that, you have to change the mode here. If we want to see it on the full screen, final output, there it is. And now you can see that we have film grain applied to the whole thing. The intensity, right? So, we're overlaying noise here. And then the size of this. But now if I hit playback, wow, they must have done something here, because this used to be like super slow. I mean, we're still working at half. That's it. I'm just going to keep pushing it until I crash the computer. It's my way. And not saving my file. That's my MO. So you can see what this does to the scope, right? Having the scope open, I think, it's like a really good learning tool in terms of like really trying to understand what's happening here with all these things. It just sprays out all the stuff, because now you get this, again, change in gradation. Yeah, you can be subtle here with this, but we have those two things, and then distortion. That's the Red Giant one. Let's see. I'm surprised. So for After Effects, AE Scripts is the home of, the After Effects marketplace. Yeah, let's see. I think this updates as is now, so that it I'll be able to load it live. yeah, I'm not gonna be able to put it in here because this is in my system drive, which I don't have permissions for on the school computer. I'll try and check it out at home between now and Wednesday, but it looks promising. Setting up your own chromatic aberration, just a matter of setting up each RGB layer and then displacing it and then adding it back in. But it gets laborious there, and having something to work with, just like we do over on the Blender side, is super advantageous. And yeah, it's just almost everybody using After Effects has some additional After Effects plugins, and it's almost always one of those, hence its absence here from the typical After Effects list of stuff. But those three things, and then again keeping the film grain last, and this is, I would say, way too strong here, right? This would be some sort of subtle effect. And also remember that we're kind of playing both sides of the game here, in that the grain is increasing variation per pixel, right? But this, we're going to export this using Media Encoder using the YouTube settings, right? Which is going to run a lossy compressor, essentially working against this. So yeah, having a grain effect on there to at least introduce some of this, you'll need to be aware of. But then, you know, in terms of whether all of that grain is going to be meticulously represented in the output, like certainly not with the given YouTube compression settings, right? So the main issue here, right, composition, once you're all done, you know, it's like, let's say hypothetically, you know, like our finals on the 17th, and it's like, let's say it's like 1:30 a.m. hypothetically on the 17th, hypothetically, and you're trying to output the final Media Encoder step, and we come over here to add to Media Encoder in Q. You realize you don't have Media Encoder installed, and so you go to your Creative Cloud and install Media Encoder. It's funny because it's true. Now, the one video I put up, you know, like over 7 years ago, before some of you were born, apparently, was like what to do when it doesn't hand off from After Effects to Media Encoder. It has, you know, like, I don't know, 50,000 views, and, you know, the comments are all from students at 4 a.m. in the morning, you know, praising me as their savior for having put up this video about what to do when Adobe doesn't work. So the YouTube settings here, right, we're using HD, and so, you know, that won't be there already for you. I'll put that one over. Our main slider on the YouTube settings in terms of quality of the compression is going to be under our bitrate, okay? Similar, but not exactly the same, to our bit. This is how many bits we're streaming per second, not necessarily how many bits we're using to encode each value. But more is better here. But whether or not you'll see a difference, it depends there. CBR is constant bitrate. Variable bitrate means that it's going to try to crank it up when it thinks it needs more. And generally, like, this stuff has been very well vetted at this point. 2 passes means it'll, you know, go through and look at it and then go back and make changes again to see how close it can get to the original thing. And you just allocate more bit rate here. That's easiest way to allocate more quality to a compressed, right? Because at this stage, we've gone through all this trouble going from Blender to, right? This is really critical to understand. Like the workflows for the rest of your careers will change, right? What programs you're using. But the idea when we start in Blender and then when we hand off from Blender to After Effects, right? This one, we really want this to be lossless, right? So that we're not working with analog media here, right? Where we're recording a tape again and again, and every time it gets fuzzier. And then when we go out to, what actually gets posted online, this is where you would want to do the lossy compression, right? And your workflow may involve some other pit stops here in other programs. At all of this part, you'd want all of this handoff to be as lossless as possible, and then only making it lossy at the end, the publishing stage, right? Regardless of what happens in the future, this will remain the same, right? You want to not lose quality while you're working on all the stuff. And so it's important to realize what are the lossy formats here. MP4, although it's slightly more complicated than that, MP4 is like a container. You can have different codecs in an MP4, but for the most part, it's going to be shrunken in size. And then JPEG, for sure, right? And so if you're sending JPEGs between programs the whole way through your workflow, you're definitely ending up with less of the original data than you start off with, right? So, and then over here, like in terms of how lossy is it, right? How much data am I losing? The further you move this to the right to allocate more space for it, the only trade-off is it's a bigger file. Now, and the other thing to keep in mind is that unless you are self-hosting this file, meaning like you're putting it on a server that you control and people are just streaming it as is from that server, that it's going to be recompressed, right? If you put it on any social media platform or YouTube in particular, right? They take the compressed file and they compress it again so that they can, they're serving. It's really important for them to be minimizing the amount of data they're transferring, because they're probably transferring more data than like anyone on Earth, like probably in aggregate. Like it's got to be close to that. It's certainly one of the top 5, right? And so yeah, I mean, that's a moving target in terms of like, what is YouTube doing? Like you can watch, I'm sure, weekly YouTube videos and about like whatever they're doing with the compression now this week, because it's changing all the time. But obviously they want it to look decent, right? I feel reasonably, and more importantly, like it seems they've really invested in it being scalable, in that it does a reasonable job of, are you on a phone? Are you watching this movie on your watch, right? In which case we probably don't need to stream you the 4K version of it, right? We can just send you the small one. And then the only trade-off here is that this makes the file size bigger, right? And it's because you're losing less. But this is an important one to be aware of. Occasionally, although this happens less now, when I've applied for things, they're like, you can submit 2 movies, but then it turns out like you can only submit 100 megabytes, and that's all of the space you have to submit stuff in their system. And so being able to go in and recompress your video so that it fits some arbitrary panel standards for uploading stuff for that submission, that's useful. I've definitely run into that a couple times. Although now, more often than not, people just ask for the link to the thing as opposed to you uploading the actual file, because correctly, these random art panels wanting to also figure out file management for this, degree of thing is like just not typically in their wheelhouse, right? So, yeah. Okay, cool. Make sense? Okay. Let's look at Alicia's. Okay, let me turn this off. Make sure that is on, and then rewind this. And cool. Awesome. There's a lot of progress on this. Let me make sure this is back on. There we go.
Okay, so you did the lip syncing. Oh my gosh.
No. There's a reason why it was turned in late.
Yeah, it looks great. The stuff popping up is super cool. I feel like do we just see it in that one shot?
What?
Like the thing coming out of the ground? Do we see the other ones coming out of the ground and the one going around? Okay, we do. But it's kind of happening like directly in front of the camera.
Should I move the camera back more?
I mean, I didn't notice. I mean, I was seeing them when they were in my peripheral vision, but like because we're seeing the flat side of them here, like I didn't notice it the first time. So there's that. And then you have a plan for the rendering difference between the two, or is this what you want in terms of like this character looking all NPR and this one looking not?
I'll try to tweak more, but that's using Matt's shader.
Mm-hmm.
And it still looks, and like there's a lot more tweaking that I've done. I think the hair ended up being the closest to being NPR.
But I'm not sure which one do you want? You want both of them to look like this? Is that what?
That would be more ideal, but
The-
I don't know if that's possible the time remaining.
Yeah. So this is the
I was using the custom shader with 1,000,000 nodes
okay.
on that's a paid rig.
Uh-huh. And then
That's
so
free.
this one, yeah. So Okay, yeah, so there is some quantizing of what's happening here using the like ramping of the shadow information over top of the color channel. That's what you're doing. The main thing, one of the main things is the outline, right? So just putting like this character, this shader has, like just a thin grease pencil line will go a long way to visually making these things look similar. Then yeah, part of it is in the modeling of the nose and stuff is different on the other one. And so in this one, what did you do? You took the light information from that diffuse and then put it into a ramp and then multiplied that by just the regular output of the color texture, right? So yeah, a lot of the sections of this character are, like there's there's almost no gradation in color there. So I think the dither, is there a dither node? I think there's a dither node. Let's look at it here. Let's look at this. Yeah, there's no dither node. The thing that comes to mind immediately is like taking the color texture and just opening it up in Illustrator and then running Live Trace, because that gives you the options. Like that's a pretty feature full environment in terms of like, I want you to crunch it down to 4 colors or 3 colors. And yeah, it should, and then you just replace the existing color texture with that totally flat one. And between that and the outline, I think that would get close-ish to, certainly much closer, right? Okay, and then the other things that stick out here, the live shot, the wide shots at the beginning that are static feel like, after watching it twice, like it's a weird drop in energy versus like how much visual energy the whole thing has, which is quite a lot, right? We have, you're either, there's parts where the editing is super dense. We're getting a lot of shots per second. They seem very short. And it works, I think. But then at the beginning, we have like these, what now definitely stick out, like this one to some extent, here where, like, they really just seem to not match the energy level of the rest of the project there in terms of because, like, what are we supposed to be? There's nothing to sort of carry it here, right? We're not close enough to any of the characters for them to, like, have a big impact on the visual energy in the frame. And then, yeah, like so some sort of, movement here, I think, would work. The lip syncing,
Camera movement?
yeah, camera movement, yeah. This one also doesn't seem to have any depth of field to it, which, yeah, I think when that happens, it just kind of, like, undermines the sense of scale you're trying to communicate. In terms of, like, low-hanging fruit for the lip syncing stuff, I think the last thing this character says, it just seemed like you missed a word. It was like something it. Is that in the lyrics there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're pretty far away. We're moving around a lot. And so the specific mouth shapes are useful. But, I mean, the low level of mouth sync, like mouth open when sound come out, is, like, the main thing you want to get there. And then, yeah, like blinking, the opening and closing of the mouth tend to be fast, right? And so when this is the other low-hanging fruit thing, like when we had the shot, either this shot or the one before where we were on this character, yeah, this one, it seemed like there was, like, this really what looked like awkwardly slow interpolation from mouth shape to mouth shape there, regardless of the specific shapes. Yeah, so when do you even need the chains? Definitely in this shot, right? That's where we need the chains for sure. Yeah, so here the lighting, right? Like the character's really falling off into, like 100% silhouette back there. The textures and the environment look like you took the next step up in terms of polish there. Except in one. You didn't change anything about the marble texture here in this shot? It's the same as before. Just like all of a sudden it looks low res. I mean, looking at it in the other shots, it looks fine. But then here, it doesn't seem like it should be that pixelated based on how close we are. But you might be able to fix that with just changing the tiling for this shot. I mean, what's the structure of the Blender files like?
Each object is in its own file and then linked into the shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the good news is here, I don't think, like, as long as you can get the initial conditions set up pretty well, you're probably going to need a little more slack on the chain than, I mean, she's not flailing around wildly, so that should all help. Yeah, I mean, the pacing and the editing and the general shot selection is good, besides these couple wide shots at the beginning, which seemed to really didn't have sort of match the visual energy of the rest of it. The main thing here is kind of like this, the lighting of this big space is a little... Do you have a reference that you're working with here or anything? Like, let's look at some spaces. Yeah, so there is some kind of texture here on the walls and the floors. I think it's maybe the, you know, like the noise pattern feels like really, like this is too big to be like, you know, like the pattern of the concrete. It's more like a stain on it or something. And so something like that, like, so.
When I moved to Blender 5, is it the note, like, one of the nodes was, like, it changed behavior.
Okay. So you made this with like a noise, like a Blender shader noise or something?
Yeah. And, like, whatever the transition to 5 was, like,
It
that's
changed.
what I had before.
Yeah.
So I had to throw that together.
Yeah, because what is...
There's windows,
Okay,
really tall windows, and a light outside.
in a light outside. Yeah, I mean, I think part of what might make this look like the banners help. I think like some columns or something would help communicate the scale of the space. And then, yeah, really trying to find, you know, a concrete texture with maybe like panel on it, right? So like maybe we could carefully choose the scale of the concrete paneling to really sort of communicate the scale of the space. Right, because regardless, there's always this, you know, pattern from the construction, you know, like this square. There's this room. God, what was it? What the hell was the name of that? Yeah. Yeah, at one point I had proposed something for this space, and then the Sydney/Australian government decided to get rid of it. The whole space, not just the event. But it's like this absurdly large, you know, quasi-interior concrete space. I mean, I think this is kind of the problem with it. Yeah, like that's like a full-size car, right? Like, it's like, in some cases, well in excess of like airplane hangar dimensions, and it was supposed to be some sort of like park, but like these things read as like these giant columns because they got like this patterning on them. So yeah, something like that I think would start to communicate the scale, like some so big, and you could just put them out of the way so they don't mess with any of the existing shots. And yeah, and then in addition to that, I mean, do you have the ray tracing turned on? Make sure that that's turned on, and look at because you do have an inside space with the light coming in. That's going to make a big difference, right? Because the most naturalistic thing is going to be that light coming in through the windows, which is going to give you some cool shading. New general, don't save. Okay, this block is now. Let's get rid of this one. Let's make a new one. It's like, I don't know, 50 meters. Okay, and so now we're inside. Make a hole. Here. And make a. All right, so we have the light coming in here from this hole, but unless we turn on ray tracing, right now it's bouncing a little bit. And then in addition, here, what we talked about before, we want more light. There we go. And then under yeah, so steps here, sort of number of bounces inside. So yeah, that would go a long way to making that light look like it's actually lighting the internal part of the space along. Yeah, and maybe making a volume if there's not already a volume to just sort of see, because I mean that's the other part I think is really going to be useful is the volumetric light shining down, spotlight on both characters probably. Then probably turning that off while you're working so it's not clogging the work mode, but yeah, that'll give you that. I think between the concrete, ray tracing, and some volumetric light coming in through those windows, all of that's going to start to communicate the scale of the thing, because I think you've built stuff, you've blocked it out correctly, but and it looks of the right scale, but just a handful of other things. There may be some big columns, right? That like they need. That part of it is also like you need, in order to have this big space, like most of the time it needs support. Like you can't make a giant box out of just a box. Like I'm not an architect, but like from what I understand, that's how it works. You don't want it falling on people. So there is that. Cool. All right, that's coming on. You didn't totally skip Thanksgiving dinner for work on that, right?
I worked on it, then went to Thanksgiving.
Cool. All right, and then calendar stuff. You already heard me do this morning, but what's that?
The pun calendar?
No, it's like the pun calendars. We'll see it eventually.
Okay.
Eventually. Right, we've got today, we'll look at the next draft of these on Wednesday from everybody, right? And then we have Monday and Wednesday, and then our final, everybody please write this down, 17th, right? At the usual time, which is going to be 1 p.m., and we're just going to be watching the final. So we don't have class on Monday the 15th. This is what YouTube's going to grab as a thumbnail for this image, for this video. The 17th, yeah. You were just late. I spent a long time talking about this morning as well.
But I always show up late.
I do know you always show up late.
I didn't show up on time. You'll be shocked. I promise.
Cool. Everybody good? All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, if you guys okay with having some time to dedicate to this and other things? You guys have, Angie, everybody else, any other questions here? Again, over my time teaching, I try to ramp down towards the end of the semester to give you more time to do the final projects, and there's only so much I can show you.
I have a question that is more like professional related versus like academic.
Ask for more money.
Okay. How do you find animation jobs?
Yeah, so a lot of what's happening in town here is freelance, right? We don't have a super large studios, either design-wise or animation-wise or motion graphics-wise in town. And so a lot of this is happening there. A lot of what I recommend for everybody leaving the program here, going to ASU, is that a lot of, especially when you're doing your internship, you get these positions, some of them with nonprofits, and you're going to be the most knowledgeable person about a lot of this, what's possible in a lot of these situations. And so suggesting those projects, bringing those to the forefront, like I know with the place Gavin's going now, that Lena was at last semester, the semester before, I don't remember. I don't think that Horse Conservancy had the idea of having a motion graphic video about their horse work. And she sort of brought that to the table there. So especially at the beginning, being prepared about that. A lot of the creative work in town runs through Creative Circle. So this is one of the main sort of creative staffing agency in town. So when I did our program review 30-page document last spring, the school and a couple other places provided some data about where were people getting jobs and so on and so forth. And there's some systemic issues with how the data is collected, but one of the things that came back is that it's the number one place for a lot of people in terms of work was quote unquote working at Creative Circle. But it's just a matter of Creative Circle always grabbing all the jobs before they go out on our main calls here, right? And so beyond that, the main places, one, if you want to stay here in town, you know, registering with and getting to know everybody at, oh my gosh, make the font a different color. There we go. Creative Circle, Google Alerts, the Google job posting. You can set up, you know, like keywords, send me an email if anyone posts anything with animation, motion graphics, blah, 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 visual effects. I have one of those set up. Looking at all the major teams in town. Diamondbacks were hiring recently. They had a motion graphics position. I encouraged several people to apply for it. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Because in town, this is a lot of this, where a lot of things are happening. The sports venues, the casinos. I know that there's a motion graphics position just last spring over at one of them. I'm not at the casinos. I mean, I kind of know which ones are which, but like the one that's over here. There was a Desert Diamond one, but then there's one that starts with like a V. I can't remember what it was, but anyways, it's over there. It's by Cardinal Place. And connected to Creative Circle, what is it? Warnings and two other ones. So there is there's two events that happen they used to be happening on a monthly basis. I'm not entirely sure if they still are. Creative Mornings is an event that moves around, and the Phoenix, Arizona Design, AIGA, Arizona Institute of Graphics Arts, and then what is the other one called now? They changed the name of it, and I forget what it is now. There's a second monthly creative event. So a lot of people don't want to hear this. I mean, it's a big town. This is the used to be the sixth largest city in the United States, but it's not New York. It's a smaller creative circle of people. So I've typed it 3 times. Yeah. Again, if you're doing the degree program, you all need to do the portfolio class or the creative professional development class. Like this, once again, like being good at this stuff is important. You should be good at it. But this is also as important, right? And so, yeah, getting out there and getting the lay of the land, right? So I'm loosely in touch with a lot of the freelancing. I'm not, I do my own stuff. So like, it's like, I'm not engaged in the same way. The other awful part is like right now it's one of the driest, like I've seen this go through, ebbs and flows, and we are in a dry season. And I wish I had any real actionable evidence or reason as to what exactly is happening right now. But yeah, there's not a lot of people being hired for stuff. It feels like everyone's kind of waiting, but it's totally unclear what we're all waiting for at this point. So there's that part of it. You know, just to be totally 100% real, like a bunch of our really great alumni who I would brought in previous semesters, like a uncomfortably large number of them have been laid off from their jobs in the last, 9 months. And they, like, it wasn't because they weren't good. They were all like real good, like really good. Even when they were here, I was like, yeah, you're great. You should go find a job. And they did. And then, like all of the stuff is happening. And, what is happening? Everyone wants to write a lot of articles about like the AI thing. I don't know if that's actually happening yet. I mean, I think that will be a thing, but it's still, isn't. I haven't seen any anecdotal evidence of someone wanting to do it on a large scale where they were able to use the Stable Diffusion technology to completely replace people on like an artistic level. Like it just doesn't, besides that Coca-Cola ad that everyone hates, like it just isn't happening. And then they made another one this year. I saw it this week that looks like pretty indistinguishable from the other one. Like they're selling Coca-Cola. So like do they even really need to make a Christmas ad? I mean, people are going to buy it regardless, right? So, but nevertheless, they doubled down on that and made another one. But on a local basis, yeah, I haven't seen a lot of people who are even maybe hip enough to know to be able to replace people in that way, like for this kind of work, right? So it does feel like it's a lot of other stuff, all of the things, tariffs, all of the news is like the inflation, the economy. Everyone would be saying how bad the economy was if it wasn't for all of the AI infrastructure propping up the spending numbers or whatever. And so, yeah, anecdotally, it is dry. And so it's definitely a good time to do the maximal amount of this, right? Because this is the one thing that AI is definitely doing is polluting the job application process. That is 100% more awful than it was a year ago in terms of, everyone's using it to apply, and then it seems like a lot of people are using it to sort on the other end. So that's terrible, like all around. Like the idea that like I'm having my bot write letters that your bot reads and sort, this is clearly not the future we want to go to. But, I have very little control over this. No one asked me. But that is definitely one of the issues. And so strategically there, networking and knowing about the jobs that are not posted is, I would, in all instances going forward here, try to control my own destiny and not rely a lot on responding to massive open calls in terms of job postings, in terms of all of the other things. Sure, if something seems like really tasty, then maybe taking the time to apply, because it doesn't, it takes time to apply to all these things. This job, it should take time, right? So if you're not already, Michelle tells everyone this, like every job should have its own letter, right? That's you want to be absolutely certain you get filtered out by the bot. Like, don't write a letter specifically for that position. You've got to craft that in each instance. So yeah, and I'll get you the name of the other monthly meetup, because that moves around too. They put it at different things, but create like a lot of the people I know and I've worked with professionally, I've met at Creative Mornings. I don't go as much as I used to, but that's a really fun event. It's usually somebody talking. It moves around. Sometimes it's at the art museum. And then Creative Circle, right? For better, for worse, like the staffing, they are a creative staffing agency, so it's not like other tepping agencies. They are pointed at something, but then being familiar with what the local studios are. So there's Reister is one of the larger ones. I've had a couple of friends who have worked there. Yeah, they actually have a cool website. They're on, it's like, what, Camelback and 24th Street or something like that. Yeah, like one of the major design firms. One of our, somebody comes in from time to time here, runs Flock of Pixels. Another, I mean, this is kind of a much smaller shop, but he does a great job. I think he's just down to LinkedIn. You should have a LinkedIn profile, you know, in terms of like the unending churn of, you know, trying to garner attention on there. Like, in some ways, I'm more positive about LinkedIn because at least it's being transparently transactional, in that everyone's about job stuff there, so it seems slightly less polluted than other social media. But you know, you should at least have a way for people to get a hold of you through LinkedIn, whether or not how much you need to participate and post and all that other business. But yeah, the process right now is so iffy that, yeah, I mean, I've heard different statistics about this in the past in terms of like the number of jobs, you know, not posted, but you know, like, there's so many issues. Like, how do we know if they're not posted, and like, what constitutes a job? Because a lot of this kind of stuff in here is going to be, you know, contract based work, you know, freelance kind of things. So those would be my main places to start. And yeah, the other main issue here, especially because of this application situation, like meeting people in person, like I can't overstate how valuable that'd be for you in terms of like establishing those relationships, and then B, that immediately puts you in a totally different category than the deluge of applications online, right? The online experience seems less and less tethered to whatever the reality of the situation is with each passing day. Yeah, because like, you know, like I have a small business in terms of like, you know, like my art stuff, like it's like technically like an actual legal small business and everything. And so like but you know, it's not, it's just an entity under which I do that work, but the degree to which it's become a target for scamming and spamming, like over the last year has gotten crazy. Like I've gotten a couple of like really, you know, like it was all laughable before, Nigerian princesses and, you know, whatever. But now, like, people are clearly pointing the LLMs at, like, a much more sophisticated phishing schemes and stuff like that. And, you know, I only see part of that because mine, you know, like, it's not that publicly visible. Like, Jen's small business is just deluged with that stuff in terms of, like, fake. And the other part of it is, like, I don't really see, most of them are not like, so send me your credit card number. You know, like that, like it seems like either they're playing some like much longer con that I like just don't understand, or I don't even understand what the purpose of the scamming was here. Like, what are you even getting out of this besides wasting my time? Yeah, definitely, I mean, step one, Creative Circle for sure, right? Because you're finishing, you're not transferring, right? You're transferring.
I don't know.
Don't know yet? Okay. Are you transferring?
I don't know.
Okay. Nat?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah. Because I'm inviting my family like all my life. I'm like, hey, when are you gonna get an animation job? Like, we need you to hold off for that.
So yeah, I mean, the creative identity in yeah, it's a particularly dry time, but knowing, especially a lot of students who have been successful coming out of here, the first chunk of time is about piecing together a couple different things, right? There's just not, like those is, like now I'm full-time here, I'm getting a steady paycheck and we're good to go, unfortunately, right? It just doesn't, that's not been in this town for a long time, and then even piecing together the freelance stuff is been tougher than usual for all of the aforementioned reasons. But going out there and meeting people in person, like, that's 100% better here. Like, I would, if I had to like prescribe a schedule for somebody, I mean, I would be thinking about 3 days a week just doing that, right? As like, just I'm going places, as opposed to sending out a ton of applications, because like the application process just seems, I mean, it's borderline on totally broken at this point. Like, I don't understand what's happening, right? I can't imagine on the other end, because it's got to look totally terrible for people hiring as well. I mean, like, I guess this, whatever they have filtering all of the applications is forwarding candidates, but, I can't imagine these are great candidates. It's just someone who's, once again, gamed the system to the maximum degree. So, building all of these gameable systems, it's like not great. All right, so on that note, I'll talk